At the same time, in terms of domestic politics, we have a new potential entrant into the Democratic side of the race. Marianne Williamson, let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. She gave an interview to Politico. The headline they put in there is Marianne Williamson is entering the chat. Couple of lines in here that I thought were noteworthy. They asked her what's factoring into your decision of whether or not to run for president. She said, apparently Biden's going to run on a message that the economy is getting stronger. I think that speaks to the disconnect between the analysis of party elites versus the struggle of everyday Americans. So pointing out that, you know, the White House, I think insanely, is planning to run on a message of like, the economy's great and everything's wonderful, while you have a majority of people saying, I'm worse off, and 70% of people saying the country is on the wrong track. She also got asked about her thoughts on the changes to the Democratic primary calendar. We've covered here how Biden has basically tried to rig that calendar to his benefit, with South Carolina going first and the states that he did poorly in, Iowa and New Hampshire, being demoted. She said, how can the Democratic Party present itself as a champion of democracy and do something as undemocratic as overtly engineering the primary schedule to make sure that their chosen candidate would win it? That is spitting in the face of democracy. And let's go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen. And then, Emily, I want to get your reaction. She announced over the weekend she is going to make a, quote, important announcement on March 4th. She's hinted at a potential challenge to President Biden, they say here in the Hill, noting she's been exploring the possibility of running for the Democratic nomination in 2024. Here's the quote: as America gears up for the 2024 presidential election, I'm preparing an important announcement on March 4th in Washington, D.C. I think you can all read between the lines of what that announcement is likely to be. And let me just say, Marianne Williamson is a dear friend of mine. I'm in no way unbiased where this is concerned. So let me zoom out from her and just say that overall, I think Biden's vulnerability is really underplayed in the media because Democrats actually have a dimmer view of Biden than Republicans have of Trump. And there is great understanding that Trump's position is weakened, is vulnerable to a threat. But you have a strong majority of Democrats saying, we do not want Joe Biden to be our standard bearer next time around. We do want to have choices and options. So there is an opening for someone to represent that majority of the party that says we would like some other choices here.
Just one thing that I've been thinking about a lot over the last year is, like, why is there no Ralph Nader candidate that is talking about tech, that is talking about some of these like really existential questions that we face as a country from a totally outside the box perspective? And I was thinking about that on the right, but I really think Marianne Williamson is that on the left, because she has, I mean, she's already weighing in on the schedule, which is totally rigged and totally pro-Biden in a way that I think has echoes of Bernie Sanders in 2016. And she's more than capable of making those arguments, but she also has something I really like, is this big picture perspective on the sort of existential problems in the United States of America. Like, she can talk about the sort of daily political fray, but she brings a totally fresh vantage point to it, and people make fun of it. Like, there's this in the Politico interview, she says, when they ask what the media got wrong about her in the last campaign cycle, she says, where should I begin? I'm certainly not anti-science. I'm not anti-vax. I'm not the Krystal lady. I didn't tell people they got sick because they didn't pray enough. Basically, I'm not stupid. And like, voters can see through that stuff because as somebody is talking to them on a level that's actually really interesting. It's a critique of the Democratic Party. It is. They also say your critics say you have no conceivable path forward. This is Politico. And Marianne Williamson responds, abolitionists would not have thought that abolishing slavery was possible. The suffragists would not have had days when they didn't think women's suffrage was possible. She's coming to this, she realizes, at a sort of 30,000-foot level. She's not jockeying to get a different Senate, to get a Senate seat, to move from the House to the Senate, or to become a governor. She's doing this as a sort of issue-oriented person who wants to move the ball forward for a much bigger conversation than who's going to be, you know, the next governor of South Carolina, or who's going to be able to sell the most memoirs. She's already done that. So I think I totally welcome this. I'm not, of course, a Democrat, but I think anything that broadens the aperture of our daily politics is healthy.
I think that's well said. She was really derided and dismissed as, you know, an oddity and a crazy person last time around by the media. And I think it'll be a lot harder to do that this time around. I mean, for one thing, it's going to be probably just Marianne and Biden in this race. Whereas last time, Bernie was in the race. A lot of people were already committed to Bernie. And so, there was less of a focus from the left about Marianne and what she was up to. And frankly, we didn't know her really that well at that point as a political figure. So I think it will be harder to dismiss her as some like crazy fringe character this time around. And let me tell you also, people in New Hampshire in the Democratic Party are, and I'm not talking a left-wing radical fringe, I'm talking about mainstream establishment Democrats in New Hampshire are pissed at Biden over what he is doing. Because having New Hampshire be the first primary, first of all, it's in their freaking constitution. So it's not like, and there's a Republican governor there. So even if the Democrats wanted to say, all right, we'll change the constitution, whatever, like they're not even in a position to do that. But also, this is really core to their whole identity. And they can see really clearly all their, all their rhetoric, oh, this is about diversity, et cetera, et cetera. No, this is about a power play, pure and simple. They can see through it. Anybody who's looking at this can see through what the Democrats are ultimately doing there. So there is a real rift, especially in the state of New Hampshire, that could potentially be exploited. And, back to the point about Marianne last time around, if you go back and watch, especially some of her moments in the debates, there were a lot of very impressive moments where she conducted herself quite well. We pulled a shot so people could remember. This is her talking about how to defeat Donald Trump and her view, which I think speaks, Emily, to what you were talking about, how she could do the policy details, but she also has this kind of deeper level analysis. Let's take a listen to that.
I'm sorry we haven't talked more tonight about how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I have an idea about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to be beaten just by insider politics talk. He's not going to be beaten just by somebody who has plans. He's going to be beaten by somebody who has an idea what this man has done. This man has reached into the psyche of the American people, and he has harnessed fear for political purposes. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field.
She's betting on Americans wanting to hear, wanting to have, I think, restored back to their politics a moral dimension.
Yes.
And it reminds me actually of the clip we played of Jimmy Carter, which was sort of a morally grounded statement about the nation, about politics, which at the time, frankly, people didn't want to hear. So it's a real gamble. It's not like it's easy to get people, past the sort of circus and the culture war and all of that and to engage on this moral plane that I think Marianne is particularly capable and maybe uniquely suited to do. So it's a real risk, but ultimately when you're as long a shot as she ultimately is and would personally acknowledge herself, like, you may as well say what you actually think about things.
Well, yeah, and we saw with Bernie Sanders, I mean, such a long shot, right? And you heard all of the snickering of the pundit class. What that does, even if you don't win, is completely changes the conversation. And what Bernie Sanders did to the Democratic Party by running against Hillary Clinton, nobody thought would have had the effect that it did, where you in 2020 have just about every Democratic candidate supporting Medicare for all. I mean, it just was absolutely transformative. Whether or not they would actually follow through with that is a different question. But we know how powerful it can be, especially when it's juxtaposed. It's basically one person against one person. You're forcing the other person to talk about different issues. Reagan was successful in some ways because people saw him as an antidote to the malaise that was pinned to Jimmy Carter, fair or not, and actually talked in pretty broad inspirational terms about mourning in America, whether or not you agreed sort of politically. Obama did the same thing with hope and change. That sort of broad-based optimism can be really powerful. And I could hear the snickering of, in the green rooms of people who were about to comment on that debate. Even you could hear them from the other side of the world, basically, when Marianne Williamson says she's talking about love. Well, the American people aren't snickering. They don't find that funny. A lot of people find that actually very moving, and they agree with it. Not everybody, but people agree with that, and they want to see more of that in their politics. So hopefully the media has learned more this time around. Marianne Williamson certainly has. She's been here in D.C. for years and has a totally different grasp. So I think this could be very interesting.
Yeah. I also think the media is weaker now than every year that goes by.
point.
The institutional media is weaker in what they're able to ultimately accomplish. So we will see what happens. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Soccer and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.